Нет, ну наоборот, Москва наступает, вступать. Ой, куда я сейчас? Куда ехать? Куда ехать? Кто меня не берет? Поступать. Да, нет, так если так дело обстоит, так я в Москву тогда уеду и все. Смотри, то есть в чем неадекватщина, неадекватщина? Неадекватщина. Наоборот. Покажи трозное твое, да. Это просто говорит, он сигнал на голову. Ставил уже все, да. Мил. Движение. Разговорение. Вы куда пойдете? Душей. Душей. Да, душей. Сплошная, самая сплошная земля. Земля. Всегда только. Всегда теперь. Сейчас я сяду и все. Ладно, Амурская усадьба. же должно как-то разобраться в себе.
Да.
Да, тебе это есть то же самое. Да. Понял. Да. Себе делай тогда, что надо себе, Смотри, я и так видел, я, да, видел уже. Делать, что надо всем. Что надо всем. Ну нет, одна, да. Зачем надо их как бы это вот, ну нет, как бы. Ну если о себе он так думает, просто вот так, да. Просто, ну понятно. Ну, наоборот тоже. Наоборот. Да. То, что надо мне. То, что надо. Хорошо. Наоборот. Мои говорила все. Не считаешь, что ли? Биотики, наркотики, антибиотики. Антибиотик, антинаркотик, антибиотик. Просто пел уже, да. Ну вот он говорил, да. Вот и все, да. Да не надо. Иди туда, вот он берет тебя, закрываем. Пой, и все, да. Ну вот это есть он сам. Да они тоже все там давно, да. Во-первых, ну вот это имеется в виду, да не дорог, ну нет, он тебя и говорит, далеко. Да. Вот нет, наоборот, вот нет, да. Наоборот. Ну как это вот надо? Это не там она говорит. Вот нет, надо. Ну, хорошо. Вот нет, надо, да. Да, он самый. Учил себя у тебя, говорит, да. Вот это и был он самый. Вот, да. Вот это он и говорил тебе. Ну да. Обидно, в отместку уже, да, говорит, отместка. Ладно. Здесь он сам, вот да. Ну, нет. Вот это есть он, да. Да, понял, тебя тут уже. Ну, да. По-своему хорошо, к чему нет? Что же? Да. Понял себя тоже, да. Не писать уже надо, а ехать уже. Писать, куда? Писать просто. Ну, писать уже. Нет. Вот нет, вот на, вот это. Да. Ну вот и чё, и куда поедешь сейчас? Куда возьмут? Ну, наоборот, значит. Марина.
Earlier this month, Nintendo and Mercury Steam released Metroid: Samus Returns on Nintendo 3DS. The game is a complete remake of the Game Boy game Metroid 2. Coincidentally, Samus Returns comes almost exactly 1 year after the release of AM2R, or another Metroid 2 remake. That one was made by fans and was the target of a legal takedown request by Nintendo. Now, it's not surprising that Metroid 2 has seen multiple remakes. This game is an important part of the Metroid story after all, because the plot, which sees Samus on a mission to wipe out the entire Metroid species, reverberates into Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, and even Metroid Other M. But it's also a, let's say, challenging game to play in 2017. For one, it's different to pretty much every other Metroid game. Instead of zigzagging back and forth across an interconnected maze-like map, the game opens up more linearly in great big chunks. In each area, you find and kill a certain number of Metroids before the lava retracts and you go to the next area with no real reason to ever return. This is probably due to the handheld nature of the game. There's no real need to make your own map, as with Metroid 1, and you can explore a single area of the game in one sitting and then safely turn the Game Boy off without being hopelessly lost the next time you boot up the game. But Metroid 2 generally feels subservient to the technical limitations of the Game Boy. The tiny screen reduces your visibility, the black and white palette is drab and confusing, and the game's got limited controls, though Samus does have more moves than she did in Metroid 1. So there's plenty of stuff here for these remakes to tackle, and it's interesting to see the different and sometimes similar ways that Samus Returns and AM2R chose to address Metroid 2's shortcomings. Look at Samus's movement. Both games dramatically improve her agility. They both give her the ledge grab move introduced in Metroid Fusion, and they both have a dedicated button for rolling up into a morph ball. But Samus Returns also drastically increases Samus's combat abilities and adds a melee counter and drops the diagonal aiming from classic Metroid in favour of full 360-degree aiming. The bosses are also an aspect that both games sought to change. In Metroid 2, you'll fight the same simple bosses over and over again, with the only change being the layout of the place where you fight them. AM2R makes the bosses a bit more interesting to fight, with new patterns, smaller weak points, and by giving the Metroids additional attacks in later fights. Samus Returns does the same actually, but the fights are even more elaborate and have more traditional boss-like patterns to learn. And if the repetition gets you, both games also have extra bosses, like a Torizo from Super Metroid, a Door Guardian, and a bullet hell weapons trainer in AM2R, and a very difficult mining robot in Samus Returns. Other new additions include new power-ups. Samus had quite a formidable set of tools in Metroid 2, but both games add the Charge Shot, Super Bomb, Super Missile, and Gravity Suit, and AM2R adds the Speed Boost with all the shine-sparkling goodness that comes with it, while Samus Returns instead goes for the Grapple Beam. Oh, and that game also has 4 entirely new Aeon powers, which come with their own energy meter. These are attacks that increase your attack and defense, one that slows down time, and another that reveals the map around your current location, which makes secrets and hidden rooms pretty easy to find. In general, Samus Returns is just less interested in letting you get lost. The Metroid indicator flashes red as you get closer to the bosses, the map screen is very detailed, and these teleporters let you zip around within individual areas. In terms of level design, both games capture the map of Metroid 2 in the broad strokes. One area from Metroid 2 will look largely the same in both remakes, but they have different ways of filling in the details. AM2R's philosophy is to generally keep what's already there, right down to the placement of item pickups and the layout of most of the rooms. But the fans added new stuff on top, like an all-new section where you control a robot and a tense escape sequence from a weapons lab. Samus Returns doesn't add much new, but makes huge changes to the current layout, with so much added density of pathways and obstacles that many locations are practically unrecognizable. Both games chose to add more obstacles and locks that can't be opened until you find a new ability somewhere else in the current area, making the games feel more like the other Metroid titles, though it's much more pronounced in Samus Returns, which has all sorts of weird obstacles that force you to get specific items and even beams. AM2R, on the other hand, is fine with you missing a fair few items and is more open to sequence breaking. Oh, and while neither game messes with the overarching structure of the game, you're still killing a number of Metroids to open up new areas after all, unlike the original, both remakes provide a method and a reason to return to previous areas. Samus Returns is dotted with teleport stations that can ping you around the entire planet, while AM2R reveals a distribution center later into the game with pipes that send you back to previous places. Once there, you can use your new powers and abilities to get goodies you couldn't access earlier. We can also look at the two games' interpretation of what Metroid 2 was originally going for. For a clear example, the unnamed and uncoloured liquid that fills the chambers in Metroid 2 was seen as lava by the creators of AM2R and as purple acid by those behind Samus Returns. And we can look at the backgrounds too. AM2R looked for interesting tiles in the original game and went from there. In the second area, these pipes inspired the developers to turn the zone into a water treatment plant. And in an area with loads of beam pickups, they dressed it up as a weapons testing facility. Samus Returns is a lot less interesting in this regard. Everything's just various types and colours of crumbling ruins. AM2R is more interested in telling a coherent background story about the Chozo, which is the ancient race that built everything on SR-388. And finally, another big change is to how health, ammo and saving works. In Metroid 2, you recharge your health and ammo at different stations, and save points are just save points. In AM2R, recharge stations are gone, because save stations now replenish ammo and health, plus Metroids drop lots of goodies upon death. And in Samus Returns, we're back to recharge stations and save points, but Metroids now drop pickups, and there are also invisible checkpoints before and after every boss battle. Now it's easy enough to talk about how these decisions have changed how Metroid 2 works. Both remakes sought to make Metroid 2 work more like the other Metroid games. They both made the boss fights more involving, and they both filled in the blanks left by the original game's monochrome palette. But it's just as important to talk about how they change how Metroid 2 feels. Take that last thing about health, ammo and saving. In Metroid 2 you can find yourself battered and bruised by a Metroid fight, and then staggering back to a save station with a small amount of health. It feels tense and distressing. AM2R makes life a bit easier with the post-fight pickups, and it neatly streamlines things by rolling recharge stations and save points into one, but the same anxious sensation is just about there. But in providing checkpoints immediately after every Metroid fight, Samus Returns completely removes that feeling. That stressful journey back up through the level and to a save point is just gone. So when judging these remakes, it's important to consider the actual experience of playing Metroid 2. Not just what the different mechanics and design decisions were in that game, but how they contributed to a specific feeling within the player. And for me, playing Metroid 2 invoked feelings of dread and unease. It was darker and scarier than most other Metroid games. It gave me the feeling of invading someone else's space. Where the other Metroid games almost feel like a big puzzle for the player to solve, Metroid 2 felt invasive and alien. And you can point to a lot of reasons for this. The lack of backtracking made you feel like you were always descending deeper and deeper into the Metroid's lair, and unlike Super Metroid, you won't return to the safety of your ship until the very end of the adventure. And then there's the tiny screen space, which means you can only see a few meters in front of you, like you're pointing a torch into a pitch-black room. And where the giant caverns are difficult to grasp through the microscopic viewpoint of the Game Boy screen, making you feel small and insignificant, the narrow, winding paths make other parts of the game feel cramped and claustrophobic. But ultimately, Metroid 2 was something of a horror game, a frightening journey into an uncharted planet, a tense dive into an alien's nest. And if you ask me, neither remake really captures that, because so many of the factors that contributed to Metroid 2's feeling were seen as issues to fix. So claustrophobic screens get zoomed out and feel less constricting, colourful backgrounds and whirring machines make the planet feel more welcoming and alive, classic Metroid backtracking sends the player up and down the planet's spine, and the more traditional level design can come across as artificial instead of alien, which is never more apparent than in Samus Returns, where you make the acidic liquid go down by plugging Metroid DNA into a giant lock mechanism. Now you might say that I'm reading too much into Metroid 2 and that most of these things were just due to the unavoidable limitations of the Game Boy, but I want to argue that most of this stuff was probably intentional. I mean, the game was made by Nintendo R&D 1, the same studio and much of the same team behind Metroid 1, Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion, so it wasn't some weird spin-off. And the game's producer, the late Gunpei Yokoi, was the inventor of the Game Boy and so was very aware of the console's limits. I think the team took those limits and made a game that would suit them, something more intimate, claustrophobic, and foreboding. And I think you can tell that the designers were trying to freak you out. Look at the Metroid husks. They don't just work as a good navigational tool to let you know that a boss is near, but they also act as a warning. They can leave you with a pit in your stomach because you know that you're about to face a Metroid. And then Nintendo used these husks to surprise you. After always finding husks before fighting Metroids, the game suddenly surprises you with a Metroid midway through a corridor, and then reveals the husk in the next room. Oh. The game's not afraid to break its own patterns after all. The repetitive act of killing Metroids to drop the lava level is shattered towards the end of the game, where the lava actually goes up, forcing Samus to go back and find a new type of Metroid. The music is very telling also. Of course, there's this hopeful, exciting tune that plays through the main column of caves that links back to your ship, but it gives way to quiet, spooky and discordant tunes when you descend into the different layers. Where most retro games are filled with catchy, hummable tunes, including a lot of great Game Boy games made by R&D 1, Metroid 2 sometimes just uses silence, some weird electronic sound effects, and Samus's footsteps to throw you off. I should point out that Samus Returns mostly does a good job of this, with surprisingly faithful remixes of the original music. When it's not just reusing music from other Metroid games, that is. AM2R is also a mixed bag when it comes to music, and a lot of the tracks have been replaced with jazzy, upbeat, Prime-style music. Metroid 2 also had some...
Ты сможешь такое сделать трек? Как бы да. Ну, он тебя понял. Ну, как бы да.
Quiet, evocative storytelling used to construct a certain foreboding mood. Like towards the end of the game, you start to notice that the number of normal enemies is going down. Where the early parts of the cave near the surface are bristling with alien life, the lower bowels of the planet are practically empty. And when you get to the area just before the Queen Metroid, there are no normal enemies at all. Just a quiet, eerie climb up to the final area. You've either gone deeper than any non-Metroid life form has gone in a very long time, or the Metroids have systematically wiped out every other animal, powerfully asserting their spot at the top of the food chain. And then you get to this room, where all the other Chozo statues in the game have been preserved and sealed away from pesky Metroids behind impenetrable blast doors. This one, deep inside Metroid lair, has been smashed to pieces. Its head is down here, its body is up there, and its item, the Ice Beam, the only weapon capable of stopping the normal Metroid, has been pushed aside. Yikes. AM2R captures this part quite well. There's sadly no Ice Beam because you get it much earlier, but the statue is still there, and the lower areas are devoid of enemies. But it's Samus Returns that really didn't get it. I don't think that final Chozo statue is even in the game. I couldn't find it, and the enemies never let up. Right there, in the path leading up to the Metroid's lair, you'll be fighting dozens of standard enemies in a noisy, messy gauntlet. Back to the Game Boy game. After this area and a final boss fight, did you know, by the way, that Nintendo suddenly removed the ability to pause during Metroid 2's final boss fight? Friggin' Dark Souls up in here. After that fight, Metroid 2 has one of the most surprising and low-key endings of just about any game from this era. After finishing off the boss, Samus comes across this baby Metroid who assumes Samus is its mother. Instead of killing the final creature and finishing the mission, Samus decides to spare its life and the two leave the planet together. One of the most isolating games you can play suddenly gives you a companion, and as you leave, the Metroid gobbling up walls that block your path, this strange, calming and evocative music starts to play. Over those last few minutes in the game, there are no enemies or puzzles to deal with. You're given time to reflect on everything that's happened. Maybe consider Samus's final act of mercy and compassion, which will be revisited in Super Metroid. Or maybe you'll reconsider the ethical ramifications of your, frankly, genocidal mission to kill a non-spacefaring species that was only used as a biological weapon by the space pirates. A genocidal mission which will be brought back up in Metroid Fusion, where it's revealed that by wiping out almost all of the Metroids, Samus wrecked the ecosystem and let an even more dangerous species come to bear. And maybe this gives a new meaning to the discomforting feeling of the rest of the game. It's a dark and disturbing game for a dark and disturbing chapter in Samus's life. As S.R. Hollowell wrote in the terrific Metroid 2 defense piece, A Maze of Murderscapes, games about killing should probably make you uncomfortable. They shouldn't be carefully crafted to be pleasant. Metroid 2 is openly about killing. It makes me uncomfortable with wordless specificity. Samus Returns, on the other hand, is very comfortable about killing. The game puts a tremendous focus on combat with that 360 aiming, multi-phase boss fights, ridiculous Aeon powers, and these goofy cutscenes where Samus does ninja moves on Metroid bosses. Why Nintendo is so obsessed with turning Samus into Bayonetta is beyond me, but there we go. And so that final escape sequence with the baby Metroid contains yet more combat, not to mention an unnecessary additional boss fight. So much extra combat actually that you can hardly hear that the Game Boy game's final music, which was given a subtle update in AM2R's completely faithful recreation of the ending, has now been given a strange, high-tempo electronic remix in Samus Returns. And if there was any doubt that Samus Returns just didn't get Metroid 2's themes, well, this is a game about travelling to an alien's home planet to viciously wipe out the entire race, with a primary mechanic, the melee counter, which is about acting in... And just didn't get Metroid 2's themes, well, this is a game about travelling to an alien's home planet to viciously wipe out the entire race, with a primary mechanic, the melee counter, which is about acting in self-defense and only killing when first provoked. I'm half joking with that one. But this ending stuff absolutely boggles my mind. Samus Returns doesn't just accidentally fail to capture the feeling of Metroid 2 by updating things, but it specifically undermines the original game in boorish, boneheaded ways. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to hold up Metroid 2 as some perfect game. There's much more to it than most critics seem to realise, but it does have shortcomings that any remake should seek to update. So I'm disappointed that these remakes had the opportunity to use modern game design to deliver the same experience as Metroid 2, but in a different form. Not the same form, but a different experience. Because what does it matter if these games have largely the same level design, if not the same disorienting feeling of exploring those levels? The same Metroids, if not the same dread of facing another one in a dark corridor, and so on. Undermines the original game in boorish, boneheaded ways. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to hold up Metroid 2 as some perfect game. There's much more to it than most critics seem to realise, but it does have shortcomings that any remake should seek to update. So I'm disappointed that these remakes had the opportunity to use modern game design to deliver the same experience as Metroid 2, but in a different form. Not the same form, but a different experience. Because what does it matter if these games have largely the same level design, if not the same disorienting feeling of exploring those levels? The same Metroids, if not the same dread of facing another one in a dark corridor, and so on. Both remakes attempt to retcon Metroid 2 into more familiar Metroid design, so AM2R brings the game up to the same
У
standards.
меня тоже такое подозрение, знаешь, женщины у нее вообще ничего нет, ни ума, ни фантазии, понимаешь? Ему не надо, потому что... Я вот видишь, получается как-то очень обидно, я тоже понимаю. Да, уважать женщину у меня тоже учили с детства, уважать всех, да. Мужчин, да, так далее. Ну что, не так, что ли, тогда, понимаешь? Ну, потому что они хорошие, понимаешь? А мы, да, типа того. Поэтому мы их искушаем, да, понимаете, это просто, да. Следовательно говоря, как говорится, да. Нет, будьте давчи, как говорится, да, что теперь сделать? Ну, нет, нам жизнь же сама показывает. Жизнь же сама говорит, да будут геи, да будут мужеподобные бабы, очень счастливые и не самоубийственные, как бы, и нормально, как бы, да. Главное, что эти несчастливые все, правильно, вот как Абика говорит, они же все счастливые. Ну, вот шутил, но там, ну, нет, люди же так понимают, да. Ну, что, ну, да. Ну, по-своему как-то, да, то есть, понимаю. Вот в том-то и дело, ты такой счастлив, то есть, что тебе не хватало? Тебе не хватало еды, а ты обжираешься уже, да, то есть, понимаешь? Да, то есть, ты пообожрался, ну, то есть, как бы все равно, понимаешь, ты хочешь там нормальные вещи. Там, например, была война какая-нибудь свирепая, и ты еще что-нибудь там хотел есть, надо было много всего есть, спрятать это все. Я понял. Да. Удовольствие, просто ты хоть, ну да. Ассоциируешь, вот как тебе психология, это, ну там же, да, психиатры говорят, да. Ну, не суть важно, понимаю, то есть как бы, и если разобраться такое, вот надо вот счастье, то есть то, что ты говоришь, счастье, например, что когда бабки это счастье, это как бы, ну да, вот как бы типа не совсем, не полный вариант это, да. Ты такой придешь к бабкам, а там ничего-то не хватает, не совсем надо еще что-то дополнить, да. Что-то ты, да, понимаешь, да. Да, ну нет, я к тому, что как бы, да, заложено это нормально, ну то есть нормально все, жить можно. Все вроде как идут к счастью, но как-то так, да. Ну да, это хорошему, да. Удовольствие, да. Не знаю, это мышечковый эффект какой-то или что-то там связанное, да. Я, короче, к тому, что можно жить, понимаешь, да, то есть, если даже со своим пониманием, не надо никому ничего назидать, потому что, да, в твоем счастье, грубо говоря, да. Ну, да. Но если ты грубитель, у тебя будет это, ничего, как-то так, да, ну да, ну смотри, я понял, да, то есть, но потребности, ну, даже вот так в бизнесе, и все, и в этом есть добро, и ты там, да, понимаешь. Типа того. Работы, да. Легкость. просто это, да, да. Хорошо ведь, правильно? Все как хорошо, все намного лучше просто, чем лучше меня, да, вот это. Ну верно, ну вот на, да. Наверное, никто не скажет тебе этого, да, ладно.
Zero Mission and Super Metroid, while Samus Returns feels like a mix of classic Metroid games and other M.
Ну вот на,
But maybe those other types of design didn't fit Metroid 2. Maybe the game's themes and intended experience required a different set of mechanics. The closest analogy I can think of is remaking the oppressive Far Cry 2 to be more like the action movie playgrounds of Far Cry 3 and 4. So, yeah, this doesn't make these remakes into bad games, and I really enjoyed both of these titles on their own terms. AM2R is a terrific accomplishment for a fan project, and lots of fun to play. And Samus Returns has plenty to enjoy also. But you know what happens to remakes. One of these games will become the de facto way of playing Metroid 2, and the original, already maligned and misunderstood, will become even less popular. Well, that was a bit of a bummer to end on, but there we go. Thanks for watching, and thank you for your patience in...
Да. Да. Что же, следовает тоже. Что?
Hallo Niki, fans.
Наоборот. Вот это есть смысл. Лег себя уже. Себе надо вкасивать. Так, стоп.